Hi students, this video is heading into discussing the middle part of the art of loving. So the sections on parenting and love of God. So probably, 36 to maybe, uh, 70 or 80, maybe 76. Um, a few of you have expressed to me some confusion or questions about the story of Jonah and why Fromm brings that up. And that's one of your discussion questions for this week. So I thought I'd say a little bit more about it. There's a recap of the story on around page 25. And I think the thing to notice or to take stock of is that in that section, Fromm is talking about brotherly love, which is extremely important to him. So the love of all people, compassion for all people, not too different in this way from the Dalai Lama. And in the Bible story, and I'm not super well versed in the Bible, but basically God wants Jonah to go to Nineveh and tell the people there who are sinning to stop sinning. And Jonah doesn't want to do that because he's like, they should just be punished. He says, if I go and tell them, that they're sinning and they need to stop, they'll stop and they'll get away with it. So he doesn't go and do that. And God later says to him, God, and this is at the very bottom of 25, top of 26, God explains to Jonah that the essence of love is to labor for something and to make something grow, that love and labor are inseparable. One loves that for which one labors, and one labors for that which one loves. And God is basically saying, you need to help everybody grow. And not just the people you love, but maybe even the people you feel judgmental about. And so it's kind of about responsibility and caring. And since you're going to be writing on a movie, if you're writing about Always Be My Maybe, you might think about all the fights Sasha and Marcus have, all the disagreements and all the tensions, and how in those fights, they are each pushing each other to grow. They know each other very well. And they're obviously attracted to each other and they love each other. But beyond that, they also are laboring for each other. They're fighting for each other, and they're fighting for each other as individuals to be their best selves. So you might think how, those concepts of Fromm's are clear in the movie. Again, I want to talk, mention that Fromm thinks a lot about conformity. He sort of sees conformity as an obstacle to love. He talks also about our awareness of our separateness and how that can lead to anxiety. He says humans' life is being aware of itself. He has awareness of himself, of his fellow man, of his past, and of the possibilities of his future. This awareness of himself as a separate entity makes his separate, disunited existence an unbearable prison. So that is sort of the problem that Fromm raises at the beginning of this book. And then he talks about, he says, the awareness of human separation without reunion by love is the source of shame. And it's at the same time a source of guilt and anxiety. And then he talks about different kinds of solutions we try to create for this problem. And he talks about orgiastic states. He talks about drugs and alcohol and sexual compulsion and how we can try to block out maybe our separateness with those things or fix our separateness with those things. He talks about conformity as a way of doing that, dressing like our friends, following the same customs and habits as our friends. And obviously we know conformity is not always a bad thing. Though taken to the extreme, it can be. And he talks about creative activity, the way we use art and other kinds of creativity to connect and deal with our separateness. And so here's another key quote. The unity achieved in productive work is not interpersonal. The unity achieved in orgiastic fusion is transitory. So he's basically saying why these solutions don't work. The unity achieved by conformity is only pseudo-unity, so fake unity. Hence, they are only partial answers to the problem of existence. The full answer lies in the achievement of interpersonal union, of fusion with another person in love. And in this section, pages 17 and 18 and 19, he talks about the difference between symbiotic union versus mature love. So the passive form of symbiotic union, and so symbiotic union is when two things kind of come together and you make a whole. That's kind of the idea, that they're incomplete and coming together, they become whole. And he's saying that's not mature love. The passive form of symbiotic union is masochism, is when somebody just attaches themselves to another person and just believes everything they believe and does anything they can to please that person just so that they don't have to be alone, just so they can attach to that person. The active form is domination or sadism. When you dominate another person and kind of bully them into, attaching to you. The difference is only that the sadistic person commands, exploits, hurts, humiliates, and then a masochistic person is commanded, exploited, hurt, humiliated. Mature love, though, is a union under the condition of preserving one's integrity, one's individuality. Love, and I love this vision of love in this book. Love is an active power in man, I might say in humans. So I think that's a real key idea for Fromm. It is an active power in us, a power which breaks through the walls, which separates man from his fellow men, which unites him with others. Love makes him overcome the sense of isolation and separateness, yet it permits him to be himself, to retain his integrity. When I read this also, I think of, there's a great quote by Dr. Martin Luther King, which says something like, hate cannot drive out hate, only love can. And the civil rights movement, which Dr. King led, was nonviolent. You can still find video and footage online of, some of those protesters fighting for their rights to take a seat on a bus, fighting for their rights, to vote, fighting for all those kinds of equal rights. Those protesters just getting beaten up, by police with billy clubs, but they are not fighting back. And a lot of people see that as kind of a part of Dr. King's Christian faith, which I think it was, but he also really believed love was our most effective power. And that was an extremely successful civil rights movement he led. A lot of our strongest civil rights legislation we have in this country comes from that period. Love is an activity, not a passive effect. It is a standing in, not a falling for. In the most general way, the active character of love can be described by stating that love is primarily giving, not receiving. And we see that in the Dalai Lama too, right? The 4 elements common to love. I spoke with somebody this morning at my office hours about connections to always be my maybe. And She was kind of a little stuck, but she had some good ideas. And I suggested, and I suggest to all of you, if you're stuck for ideas for your Think on Your Feet essay too, a good place to start after you've watched the movie or while you're watching the movie is look for the ways these four elements are exhibited in the movie. Care, active concern for life and the growth of that which we love. How do Marcus and Sasha challenge each other to grow? And you might think about who they are as kids, they are when they re-meet each other. What kind of person is Sasha when she and Marcus run into each other? What is she doing with her life? Is she are all her choices really good choices? What about Marcus? Is he making all good choices? And then think about where they are at the end of the movie, after they've been together and fought and broken up and gotten back together. How have they as individuals changed? And why have they changed? Responsibility, absence of exploitation. I want the love person to grow and unfold for his own sake and in his own ways, and not for the purpose of serving me. Respect, not fear and awe. It denotes, in accordance with the root of the word, the ability to see a person as he is, to be aware of his unique individuality. Do we see places in the movie where we can see that Marcus sees Sasha in her unique individuality, and in which Sasha sees Marcus in his unique individuality? And knowledge. To respect a person is not possible without knowing him. Do these people know each other? Care and responsibility would be blind if they were not guided by knowledge. And then Fromm goes into parenting. And just for a little comic relief in this PowerPoint, I included this old cartoon that actually I got from another instructor teaching this book. You know, this is Matt Groening, who later created The Simpsons, his whole cartoon about the 16 different types of moms. So that's just there for a little humor. Parenting and love. So for Fromm, our capacity to love is very much shaped by our parents. And he goes into a whole argument about, you know, how parenting that is not truly loving can sort of mess up our ability to love. Or maybe I shouldn't say not truly loving, but kind of mistaken parenting or inappropriate parenting can screw up our capacity to love. I was going to say imperfect, but we all know our parents are imperfect, and I'm a parent, and I certainly know I'm imperfect. So, and I definitely came from imperfect parents. So he's giving us some guidelines for some constructive parenting. How does Fromm explain the difference between a mother's love and a father's love? So in this section, I always get a little irritated because his descriptions of what a mother does and what a father does seem so old-fashioned, I guess. And so I think, and we're remembering that this book was written in 1956. But I think a good way to think about it is to just think of it as masculine and feminine styles of parenting. And I think at this point in our history, we recognize, you know, that those styles can be present in a man or a woman, right? Or, you know, two men or two women, you know, whoever's raising those kids. I do think in a lot of the couples I know, there is one parent who tends to be more nurturing and to do a lot more of the nurturing activities, and another parent who may be more active. I know with my daughter, you know, I probably do a fair amount more of the nurturing stuff, you know, taking her to the doctor and, you know, getting her, getting her dressed and picking out her clothes and making sure she's taking her vitamins, all that kind of stuff is kind of more my strength. And her dad is really great at like taking her rock climbing and taking her biking and taking her. So in some ways, our relationship as parents is kind of traditional, and does kind of fit what Fromm describes a father and a mother may do. Though I also, one of the families we're closest to, the father is basically a house husband. He stays home with the kid. He drives the kid to and from school. He helps the kid with his homework. And the mother works and is the breadwinner, and she's around on the weekends, but she's not around a lot during the week. So a very different way they share those duties. But I think Fromm's overall point is that a child needs a mix of both of those kinds of love, the kind of love that is nurturing and helping the child feel safe and secure and taken care of, and a parenting that takes the kid out into the world to experiment with, reasonable risks and adventures. So that's one way to read that section. And then he talks about sort of how important it is for parents as their kids get older to let go and let that child gradually achieve independence. And Fromm says if the nurturing parent, who he calls a mother in this, is selfish and doesn't want to let go, that's going to create problems for the kid later on, because they're not going to be able to go out in the world and do what they need to do and become their own individual. Whereas an unselfish mother, an unselfish nurturing parent, knows when to hold back and to let their kid, make some mistakes and take some calculated risks. I can tell you as a parent, it's so hard. It's so hard to hold back and let your child make a mistake, or let your child, my daughter's 11. So I'm really at that point where I really need to start working on this skill. And it is tough. It's a real test of love in a way. Do I love my child enough to let her go out in the world and make some mistakes and do things her own way, even when I don't think it's going to work out? Just having to do that is really tough, but Fromm would say really important. Eventually, so Fromm says, eventually the mature person has to come to the point where he is his own mother and his own father. He has, as it were, a motherly and a fatherly conscience. The mature person has become free from the outside mother and father figures and has built them up inside. On page 23 of the PS section of the book, you see a picture of Fromm with his mother and father and a commentary on the photo. Fromm had a lot of trouble with his dad. His dad was a mixture of tender affections, anxious solicitousness. Eric was not often permitted to leave the house in winter because he might catch a cold. And finally, a very ambivalent idealization. So you can read about that in the PS section of the book on pages 11 and 12. So Fromm is very much somebody who had to kind of reflect on his own parents' parenting style and sort of detach from it and work through it in order to develop the capacity of love himself. Fromm also says that our idea of God and our ability to love God is very much shaped by our parents. The love of God cannot be separated from the love of one's parents. If a person does not emerge from incestuous attachment to mother, clan, nation, if he retains the childish dependence on a punishing and rewarding father or any other authority, he cannot develop a more mature love for God. Then his religion is that of the earlier phase of religion, in which God was experienced as an all-protective mother or a punishing, rewarding father. So Fromm says he himself is not very religious. and does not really have a strong sense of God, but he does believe that somebody can have a strong, mature love of God. And but that an obstacle to that can be an unhealthy relationship with one's parents. So then Fromm moves into, let me see if there's anything in my notes I've missed. I did want to mention in talking about responsibility, I sort of saw a connection with Wollstonecraft with that. I don't know if you remember, Mary Wollstonecraft says that luxury kind of impedes people from pursuing knowledge and pursuing the truth, that like women become trophy wives, and because they're so comfortable in their fancy houses, they just kind of get lazy and they don't fight to be educated and to pursue truth. And I think Fromm is sort of saying that when he talks about responsibility being an element of love, that I think he would agree with her that if we're too comfortable, if we're never challenged, we never develop the capacity to really love well, because nobody ever challenges us. So again, you might think about that in terms of the movie. Um, you know, those moments when Sasha and Marcus are yelling at each other, maybe some of the most clear signs of love in the movie. So then Fromm goes into I'm just checking one other thing. Oh, I wanted to say one other thing about parenting. You might look at that in the movie too, if you're writing about Always Be My Maybe. Sasha's parents had a business when she was growing up and were absent a lot because of that business, which of course happens. Sometimes, parents have to hold 2 or 3 jobs just to support their kids, and then they're absent. So her parents were pretty absent, and she kind of doesn't know if she trusts them. And it may be part of what makes it hard for her to develop the capacity to love. Marcus's parents are really accepting of him. You even see it with his dad. They're working together. He loses his mother young, which is horrible and painful. But he and his dad work together. Marcus is kind of a pothead, and his dad and he still get along really well and are okay with each other. So you might talk about those parenting relationships in the movie. You could also say that maybe his dad is too nurturing and doesn't let go enough. Though at another point in the movie, I think his dad kind of pushes him, right, to fight for Sasha. So you might write about how those relationships relate to Fromm. Another thing that Fromm is really interested in exploring is how our society may be an obstacle to developing our capacity for love. Fromm says capitalist society is based on the principle of political freedom on the one hand, and the economic market as a regulator of all economic and social relationships on the other. The commodity market determines the conditions under which commodities are exchanged. The labor market regulates the acquisition and sale of labor. Both useful things and useful human energy and skill are transformed into commodities. So that can be a problem in developing the capacity to love. Capital commands labor, amassed things, that which dead are of superior value to labor, to human powers, to that which is alive. Modern capitalism needs men who cooperate smoothly, so we're back to conformity, and in large numbers, who want to consume more and more, and whose tastes are standardized and can be easily influenced and anticipated. So this idea of consuming more and more, you may remember the Dalai Lama was talking about, be content with what you have, be content with material things. It's a very anti-capitalist idea. Capitalism wants us to always, watch any commercial and it's telling you what you're missing, right? Capitalism needs to keep telling us that we don't have enough so that we'll buy more stuff. That's what makes our economic system thrive. So that sort of permanent sense of dissatisfaction can be an obstacle to love. It needs men who feel free and independent, not subject to any authority or principle or conscious, yet willing to be commanded, and who are stuck in the immature, Father is judge, God is judge zone. And then he says that other kinds of love, religion, oneness, and brotherly love has similar problems under capitalism. Brotherly love is responsibility, care, respect, knowledge of another human being, the wish to further his life. This is the kind of love the Bible speaks of when it says, love thy neighbor as thyself. Brotherly love is a love for all human beings. It is characterized by its very lack of exclusiveness. If I have developed a capacity for love, then I cannot help loving my brothers. Not perceiving difference or separateness, but finding our brotherhood, the idea of penetrating relationships to the core. And at one point in this section, Fromm says, the absence of conflict is not necessarily love. And we know that, right? Happy couples fight in romantic relationships. But I think also you might think about the ideal of democracy is that we do disagree. But in disagreeing, we debate, we get educated to make our own points and understand somebody else's points. And ideally, we challenge each other to grow in our knowledge as a community, not just in couples. So that's another thing to think about. So that oneness doesn't have to be about agreement, but about wanting what's best for the other person. Let me see if I have another slide and sort of connected to that, he has this idea of the truly religious person, if he follows the essence of the monotheistic idea of one God, does not pray for anything, does not expect anything from God. He does not love God as a child loves his father or his mother. He has acquired the humility of sensing his limitations to the degree of knowing that he knows nothing about God. He has faith in the principles which God represents. He thinks truth, lives love and justice, and considers all of his life valuable inasmuch as it gives him the chance to arrive at an even fuller unfolding of his human powers. To love God, if he were to use this word, would mean then to long of the attainment of the full capacity to love, for the realization of that which God stands for in oneself. So loving God is about loving everything God stands for: truth, justice, goodness. And then he says, but there's a problem. And that problem is, in fact, the legacy of the Enlightenment and capitalism. So the Enlightenment was be an individual, think for yourself, pursue what you know to be true. And that may be in tension with this idea of a community. Aristotle says it is impossible at the same time to belong and not to belong to the same thing and in the same respect. Paradoxical logic assumes that A and A, not A, do not exclude each other. It is and it is not. It is neither this nor that. So I think we're going to deal with this stuff a little bit more. Well, no, a little bit more in the next video. But one question you might want to ask is, how can you love your brother if you can't find a deep sense of connection, of oneness and sameness in the world? The dichotomies of Aristotelian thinking end up pushing humankind apart, according to Fromm, especially how capitalism encourages this separateness. So you might think about, the idea that capitalism encourages competition, and maybe that separates us. And can we find community in the midst of that competition? And in another sense, Fromm is criticizing Enlightenment style thinking. God, he says, God has been transformed into a remote general director of the universe. You probably know that he is there. He runs the show. You never see him, but you acknowledge his leadership while you are doing your part. And we'll talk about that more next time. But I hope that helps you connect to the book and think about some ways it might connect to the movie and the way the movie might elucidate some of Fromm's concepts. Let me know if you have questions.